broadcaster in Australia. He's in Western Australia, to be exact. He's in Perth. His name is Bass Tadros, and he's also a trained hypnotherapist, and he's been doing a lot of training for people, or rather, and for companies. And what we want to do this time around is talk about various aspects of perspectives with regards to COVID-19. All of us have our own, takeaways with regards to it. Let's find out his perspective, living in Western Australia, and how he sees things outside Western Australia, how he sees humanity moving forward. Yeah,
that's right. So Bass Tadros joining us from Perth in Western Australia. Bass, are you on the line with us already?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, brilliant. Hi, Bass. How are you doing? How are things currently with the ongoing lockdowns in Perth?
Well, I'm doing quite well. Perth is actually one of the lucky states here in Australia because the eastern states are mainly in major lockdowns. In Perth, it's stay at home unless you're essential, official restriction in terms of lockdowns per se.
That's right. So Bass, basically you've also worked deeply in the area of not just corporate marketing, but also business management. And during this truly challenging time globally with the COVID-19 pandemic and all the accompanying lockdowns, as we experience this ever-evolving situation, how we also react to it needs to change from day to day. Any tips for staying ahead of the curve, adapting well?
We live in very unprecedented times, and I think the last time there is a pandemic of this mass that we can sort of refer to is being the Spanish flu, which was over 100 years ago. And I think we'd all agree that we've made so much progress in terms of technology over the last 100 years or so. So we've back then they didn't even have a TV, let alone the internet and social media. So we are now in an over-information age, not just information age. And I think that the first thing that needs to be considered at these times is there's so much information from different sources, online, social media, etc. And people really need to be aware and discern what sources of information that they're listening to and what they're taking in. The level of relevance as well as the level of accuracy behind that information. Who's behind the information? Why is it being released to the masses? Is it creating a sense of fear or doubt or panic, or is it creating facts and things that people can really go by? So if we're going to talk about how do we cope with this current global situation, it's really important to take that into consideration at the basis, and then work from a constructive place. You're right, I worked in corporate, and I was quite fortunate because I got to travel to parts of Malaysia people haven't heard of. But I've transitioned from that to human behavior. And as I got into human behavior, one of the things that really interested me was interviewing different people and being on TV. And so I have done some TV broadcasting here in Western Australia over the last few years. And that in itself really made me question sources of information. It made me question and discern what am I taking from certain things, whether it's an interview or whether it's something that's coming on the news or something that I hear in the radio and the newspaper. It's really about processing and discerning that information, and that is critical at this time.
Bess, we're going to move on with some questions based on the current situation and the media. Now, a lot of articles and opinion pieces are coming up with regards to the media and the role it's playing in this day and age, more so with regards to COVID-19. A lot of people are saying that it's stoking unnecessary fear in the way we do our reporting, and you as a media person, I'm sure you'd be able to weigh in on this. Also, if you meld this with what you're doing in hypnotherapy, sending messages out or suggesting or planting a seed in someone's head in order to not stoke fear or anxiety, how do we start doing that within media circles, within friends of ours who work with media?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think that as media personalities or public figures, whether it's through a tweet or whether it's more formal channels like what we have today with this interview, it's really important to be certain what information we're putting out. And I think this is probably an area that the media can learn from this particular situation, because there's been so much self-professed, prophecies of, for example, we had media in Australia saying that there's going to be a shortage of toilet paper, and the next day people went out and did hoarding of toilet papers and clearing the shelves off that. So, what came first? Was it the media saying that people are going to go ballistic at the shops, or was it that people went and reacted to that news? So it's something that we've all got to be very careful and take a lot of responsibility for. I think that's really, really important. Just like we've got to be careful with what information we pass on to our relatives, our family at home, it's even more important to think about the public and think about the fact that this situation actually, in uniqueness, it brings the globe closer together, because it's not just something that someone over the ocean is suffering from in one country. It's global, and how we react to it, how we utilize not only accurate information. This is a really good time to, I think I'm seeing something on your headlines there about time for excessive kindness. It's a very good time to be kind in what we share. Rather than propagating fear and panic, we can perpetuate kindness and acts of kindness. We could share on the news that this is a good time to help others, to care for others, to ask people if they're doing okay.
Right. Now, Bass, also speaking about excessive kindness, moving into a far more macro perspective, another thing which the COVID-19 pandemic definitely exposes about countries and systems across the board is certain weaknesses, be it in the healthcare sector, in the social safety net sector, or in governance in general. Now, what are some of the perhaps extraordinary examples that you have seen within your community where you're at, Perth in Western Australia, when it comes to filling in the gaps? How ordinary Australians have also, just like ordinary Malaysians, really been stepping up to help, their fellow neighbor, to help somebody who may be in that little bit more of need during this time.
I think you're absolutely right. This global situation has pointed out vulnerabilities in all sorts of systems, not just in the healthcare system, but it could potentially be even in things like food. What I haven't heard anybody talk about yet to this day is how to boost the immune system, how to naturally take things like vitamin C and really take care of ourselves, how to understand the relation between excessive stress, which our lifestyles were so fast-paced and so full of stress. But no one's really talked about how stress impacts the immune system and suppresses or lowers your immune response. So the other vulnerabilities it's shown is demographics. It's shown that, obviously with Italy having the highest population that was impacted by this, it's because Italy has a very elderly population, and a lot of the people that were impacted by this were people that were on medication or were they suffered some sort of immune condition. And so we now know that the elderly people in our community, especially around me here in Perth or in Malaysia, in your community, need the extra attention. We know that children and people under 50 have a lower risk, but the people that are, that are most impacted are the elderly. So this experience has really exposed vulnerabilities, from vulnerabilities in the population to vulnerabilities in healthcare systems to vulnerabilities potentially with shortage of food. If we go much further into this process, that's where we could end up, and other different things like financial systems that are failing us, and there's so much to consider. But what we've got to do is really start to think about what can I control at a micro level, rather than thinking about the macro level, which can be really overwhelming. And if we start by thinking, what can I do different that can make the difference, is we start to realize that we've got control over our feelings. I mentioned before discerning information, but controlling your feelings and basically regulating or governance of self-emotions can impact the overall. So rather than living in a state of fear or a state of panic, we can start to get proactive and resourceful and think about what we can do proactively to help others that are more vulnerable, that are more in need.
Bez, I'd like to pick up on something that you said. We need to become more resourceful. But at a time like this, you know, there's a lot of self-help out there. And I'll just say heaps of it, as Australians say. You know, a lot of books, a lot of videos you can gain information for. Take, for instance, I just came across a video by Mel Robbins teaching us various techniques as to how one can move forward in life, not worry, keep the anxiety at bay, so on and so forth. But I mean, it's easy in theory, it's very easy, but in practice, it's really hard. Now, for most of us who are, you know, who have our heads above water, it's an easy place to start. But there are going to be people who are falling through the cracks. Now, how do advice or little pieces of tips like this will help the general public or societies at large? People who actually need to get out of anxiety, stress, depression, psychosocial problems. How do we start? How do we begin? And this I want to draw from your experience as a clinical hypnotherapist. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, with any transition, and what we're going through right now is a major transition, and it's not one that individuals are going through by themselves. We're definitely all in this together globally, and we're all going through this at different speeds, perhaps, or at different rates, with different severities. I even mentioned that there's different levels of lockdowns in Australia between eastern states and western states. So that would differ again per nation, per capita. But the idea is we're all having to evolve. Even my 4.5-year-old son has to evolve because this situation has changed his life. Instead of being able to just walk across the road from our house into a playground, that's been closed. And it's been, you know, basically locked down as if it's a contaminated area. And we now have to sort of start to understand things that we used to take for granted are changing. And I've had to simplify my dialogue with him for a 4.5-year-old, why that playground is shut down, why he can't go to school, for example, and explain it to him in terms that he can understand. So each and every one of us dealing with this, whether it's mindset, emotional intelligence, learning how to manage your anxiety, your depression, we really need to take it one step at a time. And think of it like this. I know Malaysians love great food. If you're eating your favorite meal, you're not going to eat it all in one mouthful. You're going to eat it one bite at a time, or else you could potentially turn something good into something bad and choke on it, right?
Yeah,
so
brilliant analogy. Bass, thank you so much. I'm going to have to interrupt right there because we're running really short of time, but I think you shared some really valuable perspectives on how best we can all deal better with these extraordinary times. Thank you, Bass, for joining us.
We'll definitely get back in touch with him, hopefully next week, to get more of it.